Well, Happy New Year, everybody. I'm so thrilled you're here as we begin the new year, as we launch this important series. If you walked into a building today that says Eastside on the outside, you're at one of 7 Eastside campuses. We're one church in multiple locations. And so let's give a big welcome to all our Eastside family joining us today in Irvine and Redlands, Vegas, Bellflower, Park Rapids, Anaheim, online. We're so honored to do this together. I hope 2025 is an amazing year for you. And by the way, can we just celebrate with all our campuses? And I want to thank all of you who invited friends and family, for all of you who served at Christmas at Eastside this year. Wasn't it just off the charts? And God moved and people found their way home. Every one of our campuses shattered Christmas attendance records and created such great experiences for everyone. And I want to thank you, Eastsiders, for that, for your year-end generosity to advance the work of Jesus and his church locally and globally. Well, welcome to week 1 of a series called Weeds in My Garden, where we're going to take an honest look at mental health. And I really believe the next 6 weeks could be the most important 6 weeks of your entire year. In the weeks ahead, we're going to look at issues like worry and anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicide, stress, burnout. Because every one of you either needs some hope or help in this area, or you know someone who does that you want to help. And so I'm excited for this series because I know how needed this is. But I'm also a bit apprehensive about it because it requires a scary level of vulnerability for all of us to talk about it properly. And if I'm being honest, I'm a little nervous about the reaction of some people. If we try to talk about stuff that maybe you're dealing with and you feel like we don't do it justice or we don't get it quite right, I mean, I don't want to add to your burden, right? I'm not a professional counselor. And this is complex and it's sensitive stuff. So admittedly, this is tricky and there's a definite risk to it. But I'm convicted that we absolutely have to do this series because so much is hanging in the balance for so many of you and for people that you love. I want to get started by sharing with you the background on this series and where the title comes from. The idea for this series comes from a pastor friend of mine named Clayton Hensel in Illinois. And we were at a gathering together a while back, and Clayton made me aware of a song that captures, I think, what a lot of us feel these days. The song is called Honest by a young artist named Kendall Inskeep, who was on the 17th season of The Voice. And rather than just read you the lyrics, I thought I would let you just hear this song sung by Kendall herself. Take a listen.
Every time I walk out of the house, put on another face just to blend in with the crowd so nobody sees me. You would never believe me. I tell you that I'm whole, but I'm still healing. I tell you that I'm happy, but I'm grieving. Thought I was a fighter, I'm still in the fire. But if I'm being honest, I'm not being honest. I'll give you roses, just hoping you don't see the weeds in my garden. If I'm being honest, I'm at my darkest. I'm sitting here waiting and praying for someone to show me what love is. I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest. Every time I'm past the hardest part, here comes another ghost just to pull me to the dark. Thought it was over. God, let this be over. 'Cause if I'm being honest, I'm not being honest. I'll give you roses, just hoping you don't see the weeds in my garden. If I'm being honest, I'm at my darkest. I'm sitting here waiting and praying for someone to show me what love is. I'm just being honest.
That's powerful, right? And I think Kindle expresses what a lot of us are feeling, and maybe some of those lyrics speak for you too right now. I tell you that I'm whole, but I'm still healing. I tell you that I'm happy, but I'm grieving. Thought I was a fighter, I'm still in the fire. But if I'm being honest, how many of us can identify with this? I'm not being honest. I'll give you roses just hoping you don't see the weeds in my garden. My hunch is many of us identify with these words because this is what we do. If we're being honest, so much of the time, we're not being honest. Someone might even ask you, hey, how you doing? And you're like, fine. And you give them roses hoping they don't see the weeds in your garden. And they walk away thinking you're whole, that you're happy, or you're in a good space, when in reality, you're hiding weeds, and most likely they're hiding weeds too. And so throughout this series, we're going to use this phrase, weeds in my garden, as a metaphor to describe our mental health struggles. And so today we're kicking off this series with this title, It's Okay to Not Be Okay. And the only thing that is not okay is pretending that you're okay when you're not okay. Because here's the deal. We have a real crisis happening before our eyes. The emotional well-being of people is in serious decline. This isn't just a little deal. It's not a little blip. It was palpable before the whole pandemic thing. It's greatly escalated since, and I think we all feel it. It's not surprising that the World Health Organization states that the global prevalence of anxiety and depression has increased 25% in the last 5 years. 25%. Listen to this. Anxiety is now the number one, get this, the number one issue for women. And it's number 2 for men, right behind drugs and alcohol, which I suspect anxiety is also number 1 for men. It's just that we guys are masking it with booze and weed or worse. And the younger generation is even worse off. Gen Z is the most stressed out generation ever. In recent years, the share of high school students who say they feel persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness rose from 26% to 44%, the highest rate of sadness ever recorded. That's almost half our kids feeling hopeless. And guess what? Suicide is now an epidemic, and the second leading cause of death for young people between the ages of 10 and 24. But it's not just teens. Our entire society, every age group, every demographic is wrestling with anxiety. Talk to any of your friends in the military about what a huge problem mental health is. Law enforcement, same thing. Healthcare, education, same thing. In fact, guess what country research indicates is the most anxious nation in the world? Switzerland. No, it's not Switzerland, it's the U.S. We get the gold medal for anxiety. A couple times a year, I get together with a group of pastors that all serve large, dynamic churches. There's about 20 or 25 of us, and in between those gatherings, we do Zoom calls with each other. It's like group therapy for pastors, to be honest with you. And this may shock you, but I don't know of a single pastor who hasn't hit a mental health wall of some kind in the last 4 or 5 years, including myself. Which I share because I'm assuming it's also okay for me to not be okay. Is that okay with you? A survey this year revealed that 33% of pastors are seriously contemplating quitting ministry. 33%. And I just got to thinking, if pastors are struggling with weeds in their garden like that, I mean, how's everybody else doing? And the facts say not so great. Mental health stuff now affects 1 in 5 adults worldwide, and it's growing every single day. And so today's message is designed to kind of give us a roadmap with 3 principles to guide us through this weighty series in the weeks ahead. If you're taking notes on your Eastside app, I want you to know everything I'm about to put on the screen here in the next few moments will be on that weekly guide on your app. You can take some additional notes there. You can save them. You can email them to yourself. You can keep them until Jesus comes back, okay? And you may need them till Jesus comes back. Here's principle number 1, and something that we need to make crystal clear is that Jesus really cares about the weeds in your garden. Because I think some people aren't sure about this. But he really does care about people, and he cares about you, and he cares about me, and he cares about how we're doing. So much of what he actually did when you study the New Testament would be labeled today, as you look at it, you go, oh, that sounds like mental health stuff. I mean, think about it. He called people and gave them hope and purpose and something to do with their life that was meaningful. He called them into community. He called them into something bigger than themselves. Turns out those are exactly the things that are missing for many people. And when they're missing, we spiral into poor mental health and we don't do well. When Jesus began his ministry, he went into the synagogue of his hometown of Nazareth. And they handed him a scroll to read from the Old Testament prophet Isaiah. And I want you to see these words right here and think about these words through the lens of emotional health as Jesus describes his mission. He says, the Lord has chosen and sent me to tell the oppressed the good news, to heal the brokenhearted, and to announce freedom for prisoners and captives. The Lord has sent me to give joy instead of mourning, praise instead of a spirit of despair. Like you see all those words in that passage: oppressed, brokenhearted, freedom, mourning, despair. That's mental health language right there for people who feel stuck under a blanket of despair. Jesus starts out his whole ministry in Matthew chapter 5 in what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. And as you study the Sermon on the Mount carefully, you see that Jesus was concerned with many of the things that we label as mental health today. He talks about worry and anxiety and prayer and being really authentic. He teaches about confessing everything openly to the Father, about relationship struggles, about the need to forgive. And it's clear from his teaching that he was very much concerned about our mental health, because you can't have life to the full when you're all twisted up with anxiety and depression and shame. How about the time Jesus went across the lake to the land of the Gerasenes? Mark chapter 5 tells the story. A man comes up to Jesus who's absolutely tormented. He's out of control. He's hopeless. He's self-harming. No one was able to restrain this man anymore, not even with a chain. He often had been put in chains and leg irons, but he broke the chains, he smashed the leg irons, and no one could control him. He's cutting himself with stones, and nobody really knows how to help him. His clothes are off, and it's just so clear he's not functioning normally. And today we would probably say, oh, that sounds like mental health stuff. And even though some of the people were scared and disgusted and didn't know what to do, Jesus calmly shows his power and presence with this guy. And he heals this man's inner torment by overcoming his demons. And later in verse 15 of that chapter, it says, when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons. The man had everybody else had given up on. They saw him sitting there dressed, and in his what? Everybody say these two words. In his what? Right mind. It's just a beautiful, beautiful picture. And I believe it's the healing that Jesus wants for you and me. I love the way Matthew summarizes Jesus' ministry in Matthew chapter 4, beginning in verse 23. When he says, Jesus traveled throughout the region of Galilee, teaching in the synagogues. We would expect him to teach, and announcing the good news about the kingdom. That's not a surprise. And he healed, everybody say these two words, every kind of disease and illness. And whatever their sickness or disease, or if they were demon-possessed or epileptic or paralyzed, he healed them all. He healed them all. Every kind. It doesn't say that he only healed physically lame people. Some were thought to have demons. Some were thought to be crazy. Some couldn't walk. Jesus healed them all. Whatever our problem is when we're broken or sick or ill in our heart, in our body, in our mind, and it's not how it's supposed to be. And that's the kingdom ministry that Jesus came to do. And that's why we can't ignore the weeds in our garden, your garden, my garden, because caring for the whole person is central to the ministry of Jesus, and it's what we are called to do. Here's principle number 2 to guide us in this series. There's a complex root system to the weeds in your garden. And followers of Jesus, I'm just going to shoot straight with you on this. Sometimes we add to the shame of mental health stuff by sort of giving off the signal that if you were a real Christian, you wouldn't be feeling this way. If you truly followed Jesus, you'd have enough faith to overcome this. If you were a mature follower of Jesus, you'd just pray it away. And listen, those things are just not true. Among some Christians, there can be sort of a stigma attached to mental health stuff that we've just got to bust to pieces, because if we're worried about being judged or shamed or thought less of, we're not going to get the help that we truly need. There's a complex root system to the weeds that we all have in our garden. Let me try to show you what I mean right here. When weeds in your garden pop up, you might wonder, where did they come from? Like, what's the root cause? Well, honestly, there are 4 different causes that can feed the weeds in our garden, and usually it's a combination of these 4 adding to the complexity. Number 1 is situational. I mean, stuff happens, life happens. Someone tells you they don't love you anymore. Someone you love passes away. Your kid gets bullied. You change jobs, you move, you're getting harassed by a neighbor or a coworker, and all of that maybe is going on all at the same time, and it piles up, and the load becomes too much, and we just have a hard time because of circumstances. I've done Christmas services for over 40 years, and never in those 40 years have I prayed with so many people burdened by situational stuff in their life as I did this Christmas. For some, grief. For some, illness. For some, loss. For some, addiction. For some, incarcerated loved ones. For some, special needs family members. But between services in the hallways, I prayed more prayers and witnessed more tears than I've ever experienced at Christmas services. Situations pile up and can lead us into anxiety, depression, or some other kind of emotional challenge. But not every weed in your garden is caused just by your situation. A second root is biological. This is just how our bodies are hardwired. We live in a fallen world, and not everything about our biology and our bodies is the way it's supposed to be. Show of hands on something. How many of you have at least 1 or 2 things you'd like to change about your body? Just raise your hand. Sure. I've got a buddy who has an unbelievable metabolism, and I know this because he can eat an entire horse and 3 pizzas and 3 cakes for dessert and snack on Doritos and Ding Dongs all day, and he stays the same beanpole that he is right now. And there's other people like me that we just scroll by a donut on Instagram and we put on 10 pounds. We're just biologically different. And biologically, there are issues at play that affect how we wrestle with mental health. And so there are hereditary things. There's predispositions sometimes toward depression, perhaps, and other things like that. So some of the weeds in our garden are biological. Third, some are what you might call medical or clinical. Maybe there's an issue going on that's out of balance. Maybe there's a chemical imbalance and you need someone trained that can sift through the data and help diagnose and treat and maybe even prescribe something that will help, because mental health weeds sometimes are medical in their origin. Some weeds in our garden are so severe it will require you to get appropriate professional help, maybe counseling or therapy. And listen to me, there is no shame in that. God gave us doctors and medicine for certain scenarios. And sometimes our brain gets ill just like the rest of our body gets ill. And so if you need help, get it. We've created a Weeds in My Garden resource page on our website to help you. Maybe even find counselors, and much more stuff will be added there in the weeks ahead. But can we also admit that the weeds in our garden sometimes are also deeply spiritual? How you're doing in your soul has a huge impact on your mental health and emotional countenance. When you're not right with God, when you're not right with the people that you love the most, when there's secret sin that's going on in your life, there's no pill you can take to fix that. There's no counselor who can heal that. And until you do business with God and get right with God, the guilt, the shame, the hiding, the anxiety will adversely impact nearly every area of your life. So do you see it now? Do you just see the root system to the weeds in our garden is complex? And if we don't understand that, we can do a lot of damage to ourselves and to people that we love. One of the dangers in a church setting like this is that we can tend to make everything spiritual, when some of the weeds in our garden are situational, biological or medical or clinical. There are some situations that just can't get better with more prayer or more Bible study or getting right with God. And it's easy, especially for pastors and other followers of Jesus, to make the assumption that if you were just more spiritual, you just wouldn't have this problem. And that's not true. You look at examples in Scripture like Jeremiah, Elijah, Moses, David, even Jesus himself, all went through periods where it sure looks to me like depression or poor mental health, and the roots weren't just spiritual. Jesus himself wept and cried out in horrible agony on the night that he was betrayed. That was real trauma caused by his situation. So don't be one of those well-meaning Christians who gives horrible advice to people because you think the mental health weed is going to be always caused by a spiritual issue. If a person has bad kidneys and goes to get dialysis, we don't say, "You're going to dialysis? Gee, where's your faith? Have you been praying?" We would never say that. We know that sometimes we get sick because of an organ in our body. It's just not working right. If your heart isn't beating fast enough, we don't think twice about somebody getting a pacemaker. If your cholesterol is too high, you take something to lower it. If you don't produce enough thyroid, you take medication to balance things out. We don't seem to have any problem with that as Christians, but yet sometimes when a different organ in our body up here starts to malfunction, with some chemical imbalance or something not working right, we say, well, if you were spiritual, you wouldn't need to see your doctor. You and Jesus would just go and solve that on your own. And gang, I just think we need to stop that, because sometimes the weeds in our garden are situational, are biological or medical. They are not always spiritual. Very often, it's actually a mixture of more than one of those things, right? And so let's just be careful about saying everything's spiritual, because we don't want to drive a wedge in the relationship someone has with God at the very time they need God the most in their life. But I also want to note we can go too far the other way. We can sometimes fail to recognize that sometimes the things that mess with our mind and our body and our well-being are very much spiritual. Jesus taught we have a spiritual enemy. He says in John 10:10 that the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. He says, my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Jesus says, I've come to give you a rich and satisfying life. The devil's intention is to ruin it. You've got a real spiritual enemy who wants to steal your peace of mind and kill your joy and destroy your self-worth. A lot of mental health battles come down to us believing some of the lies that Jesus says really come from the pit of hell itself. I'll never be loved. I'll never be enough. I'll never be wanted. I'll never be accepted. And these things are lies. and are the exact opposite of what God promises us in Jesus. And when our minds are darkened in a certain way, it's like I think we believe the lies of the enemy. And we struggle with shame. Not just, I did something bad, but I am bad. And that voice whispering in our ear that leads to self-loathing and a downward spiral is not from God. And we forget that we're beloved sons and daughters of the God who loves us so much, he gave his only son for us. A God who says, I am for you, not against you. You are forgiven and loved. You are beautifully and wonderfully made. That's who you are. And if you forget what God says about you, you're going to miss the life God has for you. Here's principle number 3. And then we've got a really special and powerful ending to the service today. Relationships are indispensable to mental health. And this one is really, really tricky because quite possibly the cause of your poor mental health for some of you is due to someone else. Relationships have the tremendous capacity not only to help you but also to hurt you, and that's really unfortunate. It's a natural human reaction. If you get burned by a hot stove, you pull back. And some of you have been burned by some relationships that wounded you, scarred you, hurt you. And I get it. It's natural to pull back and to stay isolated, alone. But if we've learned anything in the last 5 years, I think it's that isolation and lack of human interaction and social distancing only grows more weeds in our gardens. In many ways, we've replaced relationships with technology. Today, we sit glued to our phones, binge watching Netflix. And that decrease in real relationships, listen to me, drives an increase in anxiety. But God designed us to do life with others in community. Arguably, the most stressful moment of Jesus' life was in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before his crucifixion. And he was filled with such anguish that he was sweating, drops of sweat and blood mixed together. And what did he want in that moment? He wanted community. He wanted relationships. He was asking his friends, the disciples, hey guys, stay near, pray with me. And if Jesus needed that, you and I need that too. Listen, you want to know 4 of the most powerful words in a church community like Eastside? It's simply these 4 words. I've been there too. I've been there too. Some of you have come through some really dark seasons in your life that you're not proud of. And what you didn't need in a season like that, when you were at your lowest, when you were at your worst, when you were overeating, when you were grieving, when you were so low, you couldn't even get out of bed and get dressed. What you didn't need is someone to lecture you and point their finger at you and say, you should, you should, you should, you should. No, what you needed is someone to say, hey, I've been there too. When you're anxious, you can sometimes be a jerk to your spouse. I've been there too. When you were stressed out, you yelled at your kids on the way to church. I've been there too. When you couldn't sleep, you ate the whole bag of Doritos at 1:30 in the morning all by yourself. I've been there too. When someone cut you off in traffic this week, you wanted to road rage and cuss somebody out. I've been there too. But I got this Eastside sticker on my back window, so I couldn't, but I wanted to. Friends, don't blow by this. Learn from the example of Jesus. Relationships are indispensable to mental health. And this is why I will never stop challenging you to get into First Step, to join a small group. Outside of salvation and baptism, those are the 2 most important steps you could take, not just for your spiritual health this year, for your emotional and mental health this year. Some of you right now are reeling from the death of a loved one, and the grief is just overwhelming. Some of you are trying to heal from a divorce that has rocked your world. Listen, both of those things, I've been there too. don't do the journey alone, but do it with others who've walked in your shoes. This week, we're launching Grief Share, and we're launching divorce care groups, and Anaheim and Bellflower and Vegas campuses all have child care provided on campus. And if you're not near one of those campuses, we have groups launching Friday night online. You can join from anywhere. Just check out eastside.com/care to learn more about our care groups. We've got a lot more groups to tell you about in the weeks ahead that'll be unfolding before us. You know, one of the things I love most about this church is that Eastside is a place where it's okay to not be okay. Jesus came for people who are not okay. One day, some self-righteous people were looking at Jesus hanging out with notorious sinners and people with bad reputations, and they were like, what's he doing? He can't be from God hanging out with people like that. And they asked his disciples, why does he eat with such scum? And Jesus said, you want to know why? Here's why. Because it's the sick who need a doctor. Jesus is the healer of souls. He's the healer of families. He's the healer who knows what's going on within us and why we're struggling with anxiety and panic attacks and worry and burnout and stress. And when we're depressed and sad and can't perk up, even though we want to. And when we can't get out of bed, even though we want to. And when we can't shake the shame or the guilt. When we think about escaping it all sometimes and just ending it all. Jesus is the healer of those things because he's the doctor of our soul. And this church is a safe place where it's safe to admit, I'm not okay. And if you're hurting right now, you need to know you don't have to put a fake smile on around here. Eastside is not a museum for people who have put it all together. We're a hospital for the wounded. We're a community of wounded healers who are finding our help and our hope in Jesus Christ. Amen? That's who we are. Now, I told you we had a special and powerful ending to the service today. Let me ask you, how many of you are familiar with a musical artist named Jelly Roll? Anybody? Yeah. So, he's not here today. I don't want you to get too excited. I wish he was. Because he's definitely lived with a lot of weeds in his garden. I mean, you can just look at this pic and you can say, that's a guy who's done some living. He's been in and out of jail 40 times. Traveled down a lot of dark roads. But then he had an encounter with Jesus that he describes as his Damascus Road moment that turned his life around. Now, we don't normally do Jelly Roll songs at Eastside. But I asked our team if they would do one today. And in just a few moments, you're going to understand why. Because this song is the song of a guy who has found redemption and hope for the weeds in his garden. But it started with admitting, I'm not okay. So take a listen, and then we'll close in prayer.
I'm not okay. I'm barely getting by. I'm losing track of days and losing sleep at night. I'm not okay. I'm hanging on the rails. So if I say I'm fine, just know I learned to hide it well. I know I can't be the only one it's all gonna be alright. It's not okay, but we're all gonna be alright. I woke up today, I almost Some days it all gets worse. Some days I swear I'm better off laying in that dark. I know I can't be the only one who's holding on for dear life. But God knows, I know, when it's all said and done, I'm not okay, but it's all gonna be alright. It's not okay, but we're all gonna be alright. It'll be alright. Yeah, we're gonna be alright. I know one day we'll see the other side. The pain will wash away in a holy water tide, and we all gonna be alright. I know I can't be the only one who's holding on for dear life. But God knows, I know, when it's all said and done, that I'm not okay, that it's all gonna be alright. And it's not okay, but we're all gonna be alright. And I'm not okay, but it's all gonna be alright.
Let's bow our heads together. And God, I thank you for the privilege to just be in a space where it's okay to not be okay. And thank you for a church that lives out that value and says this is for everyone, and we're all welcome here. God, I thank you that Jesus really cares about this area of our life, and that we can trust him on this journey. Help us to not get all simplistic in the weeks ahead about the answers to issues that have very complex roots. And God, I would just pray that we would all be intentional about moving toward relationships with each other and community, because I know we can't be healthy without it. And I thank you where there are so many people in this church who can just come alongside, who've walked in our shoes and just can say, I've been there too. So I pray that you would do a deep work in us in the weeks ahead. I pray that you would do a great work through us as we heal together. And we lift our prayers today in the name of the great healer, Jesus Christ. And everybody said, amen.